Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to a brand new episode of Stoneshard Podcast, episode 4, featuring yours truly, DarLeeLlama, and my good friend Beardodood. Say hello, Beardo.
Hey everybody, Beardodood here. Today we are going to be looking at athletics versus combat mastery. So there's not much to say to set up either of these, but we will just talk about their importance in the game just a tiny bit, because aside from the normal weapon skills that we've looked at, they're much more interesting. So both of these, along with spears, are the only skill trees that have been added after the game was initially released. And anyone that's new coming just into Bolt Thrower, athletics and combat mastery were added with the Trollslayer update, which was pretty sizable. Aside from just getting the troll, which is definitely fun endgame boss, these two skill trees really changed a lot in how we consider our builds and also how we deal with enemies. Because after Trollslayer, most, if not all, of the enemies got access to either athletics or combat mastery. For instance, wolves were not able to dash before Trollslayer, but after they do, everybody's pretty familiar with them dashing you. Same deal with some of the enemies using Seize the Initiative, or really, I think Seize the Initiative and Dash. Some of the bosses will use things like Adrenaline Rush, which we'll get into all of those. So those are just kind of the things to keep in mind. Both of these skills are really, they're supplemental skills for the weapon tree, or whatever you end up choosing. And most of us won't actually go all the way through, though there are some very powerful builds that can be combat mastery or athletics only. So first, we're going to focus on athletics. And looking at athletics, we're looking at Mighty Kick. This is the first skill in the tree. It deals 6 plus 25% strength damage modifier for crushing damage, with a strength modifier chance to knock back the target. Applies the target with negative 7.5 times 0.25 agility, control resistance, and the same for move resistance for the next turn. If the target resists the knockback, the skill doesn't go on cooldown. There is a hidden bonus of 5% accuracy. What do you think of this one, Darley?
I used to hate this skill. I had no love for it. A lot of people in the Discord were basically swearing by it, and I was a naysayer in response. But then something happened in which I actually tested it out after I fell in love with maces in general, and its ability to knock back. Its high ability to knock back and its low cooldown made me completely 180 on this ability. I think it's one of the best damn abilities in the game, quite frankly. The fact that you can slam someone in the early game for 1 talent point into the wall, deal bonus damage, and have a very high chance to daze them is good on its own right. The fact that it completely refreshes its cooldown, if you don't land the stun, means that you just spam it until they are stunned, and then you get free attacks on them. The fact that since you start at 10 strength, you have a minimum chance of 50% chance to knock them back. And with the correct positioning, it's almost a guarantee that you will get that stun off. I love this damn ability, to be honest.
Yeah, and the other thing to keep in mind too is the low energy costs. So when you're in that kind of situation where you're in the battle and it's getting towards the end and you've used up all your skill points, if the enemy is against the wall, it is a nice go-to. It definitely complements any knockback, oriented build. So maces, staves, even geomancy, because you can pop the boulder off behind them and drop a kick. I was the same as you. I used it a little bit when it first came out. I was like, man, this skill sucks. But then once I started getting into maces, I was like, man, all I really need is Onslaught and Mighty Kick, and I pretty much don't need any other active skills to get the job done. So yeah, it's, as far as the starting ability, it's definitely underestimated, I would say. Probably more so by newer players, but I would definitely say to give it a chance.
It all comes down to the concept of crowd control. You know, being able to control your opponent is very, very important in almost any kind of game. And with stun being such a strong crowd control, and the fact that it procs off this ability, it's just really good. I mean, I went from basically struggling on the first dungeon with, you know, let's say you don't start with the necessarily great weapon type. You know, let's say you're not starting axes or swords or something that would do, you know, fairly consistent damage. Let's say we go staves, for example. Being able to have that kick, you know, stun your opponent and give you breathing room is so important, you know, when you wouldn't have any other option otherwise, you know, because yes, staves can do that, but it only does it, you know, some of the time. Mighty Kick, you know, is really consistent, you know, and as you said, low cost, low cooldown, it's spammable. So everything points to this ability being good just from its overall statistics. The only thing it lacks is damage, but that's not what we're using it for. It is not a damage ability. It is a crowd control ability, and it does its job exceedingly well.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And for being a starting skill, it is quite choice. So let's move on. The next skill, which is actually quite nice as well, Elusiveness. This is an active skill, grants 100% dodge chance until the end of the turn. After that, applies the effect of Elusiveness, which gives plus 15% dodge chance, minus 3.5% damage taken. The effect's duration is prolonged by 2 for each dodge performed during the turn of this skill's activation. Each movement or received attack grants 1 stack of the effect, up to 4 stacks. What are your thoughts on this one?
It comes back to proper planning, right? When you have an ability like Kick, which, you know, is awful if you don't have a surface to kick them up against, you know, if you didn't properly plan for that, the ability will not be good. The same goes for Elusiveness. If you use Elusiveness improperly, it's not that great. You know, if you use it when they're far away, or you only have one guy against you and you're fighting 3, you won't get much use out of it. But when you get it, when you get that sweet spot, when you have all 3 guys on you, you hit Elusiveness, they all take their swings, and then they swing again on you the next round. You know, your dodge just goes through the roof. You know, you're getting such a big benefit from it. Sorry, I forgot to switch to Elusiveness. There we go. You get such a big benefit from it. It's huge, you know, and it matters a lot. It reminds me a lot of parry before they ended up changing it. Parry being, you know, an oh crap button, you know, just that button that you hit when you're about to take a bunch of damage, and you use it to get out of trouble. 100% dodge is amazing. It basically negates all physical type attacks. You know, they can't shoot you, they can't, you know, hit you. I think they can still use magic. So I mean, that is the one weakness to Elusiveness. But other than that, this ability is right up there with Mighty Kick in my opinion. It is top tier. I love this damn ability on any kind of build I do, whether I'm playing heavy armor, light armor, anything. It is really good as a defensive ability.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you on that. Yeah, and the 100% dodge chance, it gives you a little bit of breathing room, but the added Elusiveness effect, and especially it works almost like a stance. It's like a pseudo stance almost. It has saved me, and it has gotten me to 100% dodge outside of the first attack as well, especially if you go with a very dodge heavy build. That those stacks and those extra turns with the 15% dodge or more can really make or break any battle that you're in. And it really is an oh crap kind of skill to pop off. I did that recently with when I was fighting the troll. I popped this off, and that gave me quite a number of turns where I didn't have to worry about getting knocked down or hurt too bad by the troll. So yeah, I agree that it's the thing too, as I said early, as we go through both these, is they're very good skills in the beginning. There's definitely good skills at the end, but really towards the middle is where it can become difficult to choose, but also not so much, and it really just depends on what build you're going for. But so going on to the next one is Sudden Lunge. With Sudden Lunge, you perform a strike with negative 75% damage. It puts the target's abilities on a two-turn cooldown with a 40 plus agility modifier chance to apply confusion. There's a hidden bonus of 10% accuracy. What are your thoughts on this one, Darley?
I like any ability that comes with that hidden passive bonus of accuracy, but when I first saw this ability, I didn't think much of it. The same as I did on the others. It's a running trend for me for the athletics tree. I did not fall in love with it at first, but seeing it in action, it really, really turned me around. What did it for me for this particular ability was someone had managed to get the cooldown so low that they were able to spam Sudden Lunge on a no cooldown. And even though it's taking, 75% of the damage away, you're applying confusion, and confusion basically means they can't do anything to you. They're just kind of sitting there in a stupor. So if you can get it to such a low cooldown, you basically can just play with your opponent at your whim. There's nothing they can do. When you have an ability like that, it kind of breaks all boundaries of the game. And that's when you get into truly broken builds, something that no one can actually stand up to, that isn't a boss. So
yeah, and with this one, in all my builds, I typically go elusiveness over Sudden Lunge. It is a very interesting skill, and I could see what you're saying with that. I am interested, though, if you're doing the two-turn cooldown and confusion. I guess the two-turn cooldown is like backup in case you're not allowed to apply confusion. But if I remember, I can't remember exactly. I probably should have put it on the screen what exactly confusion does, other than just giving you the off chance of not doing what you're trying to do. I don't think it does the same as stun, where it just locks out abilities, right?
Yeah, it's not the same as stun. I think you just, I think you're forced to. Gosh, I don't know. We really should just go ahead and look it up. Yeah, go ahead and look it up right quick. That'll be fine. I know it's powerful.
So it's a mental effect. Psionic resistance is minus 25%, fumble chance plus 10%. Can't attack or use abilities. So that's why I was wondering, if you have a two-turn cooldown, if you put all of their abilities on that cooldown and you apply confusion, it's almost a little bit redundant, I guess, depending on how long the confusion lasts.
The way I think of it, they can still move, and that's probably the only thing they can do when they're in confusion. But with the way the current AI is set up, they probably won't move away from you.
Yeah, that'll probably
it's effectively stun.
Yeah.
So, and that's a 75% chance to confuse. So with us talking about how great stun is, confusion is just as good.
So it's 75%. You do 75% less damage. It's 40% plus your agility. So starting with 10 agility, it's a 50% chance to apply confusion, and then of course that would go up as you level.
Oh, I got that wrong. But still, that is a very good chance to actually apply confusion, because it's a minimum of 50. So
Yeah, and the passive that will go after the next skill modifies it and makes it even more powerful. So moving on from sudden lunge is dash, and dash is probably one of the go-tos for most people, especially if you don't have a gap closer. Dash performs a dash towards a targeted tile. It has a range of 3. The skill's energy cost is increased by 20% for each enemy adjacent to the starting position. On arrival, grants plus 10% weapon damage, minus 10% skill energy cost for 3 turns for each adjacent enemy. What are your thoughts on this one?
So, you know how big I am about gap closers in general, right? How necessary they can be to playing any kind of melee type fighter. In a lot of respects, dash fills, as you mentioned, it fills up that role, but it also plays an important role that you don't see in this game, and that is an escape tool. You know, it's the opposite of a gap closer. It's an escape tool. You can get away from people. And I think that's the go-to that a lot of people, when they talk about dash, they really bring up. They're bringing up the fact that this is probably the only reliable ability you have to go from melee to running away, right? That makes this ability super important in its own right. And I feel like since it's the only ability that can really do that, it has a special place in the game. Now that, of course, is subjective because, you know, you can't necessarily get away from all enemies, but you will get away from most enemies if you want to. That lets you choose your fights. And if you knew how powerful it was to be able to just choose your fight in a game like this, everyone here probably who does listen to this would understand, you know, being able to only fight when it's advantageous to you is super powerful. So whether you have your own gap closer in a different skill tree or not, dash is good. It's super good. You know, very highly rated from me.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting skill in that it serves both purposes. It can be a gap closer and it can also be an escape tool. And you kind of see that with the debuff that you get if you are running away from a bunch of enemies.
Mm-hmm.
Not that it's going to be a huge pain. Well, no. So if the energy cost is increased by 20% and you have 3 guys around you, you are going to need a lot of skill points. And if you're in the middle of the battle, if you're low on skill points, then it's not really as advantageous. So it could be up to 30 or 40% or 30 to 40 energy just to pop it off. But it is also really interesting as a gap closer. Just because it's not actually doing the strike, but it is giving you a buff for 3 turns to do additional damage and for your skills to cost less. So it's definitely a welcome addition when we got Trollslayer. And this is definitely a go-to for just about, I would say, the majority of enemies in the game, whether they're wolves or bandits. So,
agreed.
Yeah. So, and we'll go on. There's a passive underneath it that will modify it, and we'll discuss that as well and the implications on other skill trees as well. But moving on, we're coming back to sudden lunge. There is a passive time tied to sudden lunge called No Time to Linger. So when you use sudden lunge against targets affected by daze, stun, confusion, immobilization, or bleeding, it does full damage and doesn't take a turn. It has a passive bonus of 3% accuracy. What do you think of this one, Darley?
So this is kind of what I was saying before about people who are capable of abusing the particular skill. As long as they're able to be hit by confusion, you know, you can spam that ability and basically confusion lock them. This allows you to do that. You know, it doesn't take a turn as long as you have those abilities on. Well, what can we reliably? How can we reliably put the enemy into one of these conditions: daze, stun, confusion, immobilization, or bleeding. Well, I mean, that's spears, maces, and swords and daggers right there. The only thing that doesn't fit is our axes, you know? So almost any of the basic weapon types can achieve this fairly easily, you know? It's not hard whatsoever. And when you consider that and the fact that you can just basically smash them with this ability over and over, it's super powerful. Definitely worth the synergistic point, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say if you're going sudden lunge, you should be planning on spending 2 skill points and getting this one. I mean, there's not many passives that complement the main skill as well as this. I mean, and there's so many different trees, weapon trees that you could be using where this is useful. Like you said, with maces, with daggers, with swords, with spears, you're gonna get one of those effects, and then you can not only does the sudden lunge then take the full damage, so you lose that debuff of 75%, but it also doesn't take a turn, so it's basically a free attack and will allow you to attack twice. And I don't believe there's a lot of skills like that in the game.
The free turn. The one that doesn't take a free turn.
Well, one that basically allows you to attack twice.
Mm-hmm.
So you could pop this off and pop off one of your other weapon skills.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Plus, if you have stun or confusion or any of these on them, I mean, it's just setting up so you can just wail on them with, you're basically getting extra hits before they come out of whatever, debuff that they have on them. So moving on, the next one in the skill tree is Leg Sweep. Leg Sweep performs a strike against 3 adjacent enemies. It deals crushing damage modified by strength and agility with a 70% plus agility chance to immobilize all affected targets for 2 turns and then retreats to a targeted tile. It has a hidden bonus of 10% accuracy. What are your thoughts on this one?
So I don't typically go the right route of athletics. I think you mentioned that as well, or a little bit earlier. Mm-hmm. It's so much more tempting to pick up the 3 really good skills of Mighty Kick, Elusiveness, and to dash, and just kind of go from there. That being said, considering what we've said about sweep or sudden lunge, this ability actually gives you, this ability actually gives you the chance to use immobilization on an enemy and reposition yourself. The ability is quite good for what it wants to do, for setting up kick attempts and stuff like that. And, if you can immobilize them, it's like you said, you get the free turn sudden lunge, and then you slap them straight into confusion. So they're very, very synergistic. And it just makes me realize even more just how front-loaded athletics is when it comes to their good abilities, it seems to be. Because, they all work really well with one another, it seems like. So I think this ability is good. I just never go down this route very often.
Yeah, I agree. I've actually never gotten to use Leg Sweep. It does sound pretty cool, especially high chance to immobilize. And then it's almost like a more advanced version of maneuver, in that you do the sweeping damage and then you back off. So this is, again, if you weren't going to go the route of dash, but you still wanted a retreat option, this is a pretty good one to have. I think Staves had a similar one like this, though I can't remember the name of the skill off the top of my head.
The sword one, what's it called again? The one that you step back with on the swords. You have to take a step away from the opponent.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember now.
I
They
think
look.
that one you have to step away, whereas with this one,
Just keeping distance.
yeah, with this one it actually allows you to sidestep them. So there is a slight subtle difference there. Of course, if you've got nowhere to go, you still have to go backwards, but it's still useful. You know, if you just want to go to the side and set up the kick, that can be a big difference.
Yeah, and the staff skill I was thinking of was Peacemaker. So a little bit similar in the idea that you take the hit and then you can back off. And you can retreat if you want, or you could just get ready to do even more damage. Or, I mean, you could do leg sweep, back off, and then use dash and get those bonuses while they're still, confused or knocked out. So
Athletics does exactly what it says, and that is battlefield movement, and it's superior to that. At that, I meant.
It's interesting, too, because right off the bat, no matter if you go left or right, the first 3 skills, they're all active skills. And then after that, it's all passives, which we'll start going into after this. With the next one is Sprint Training. Sprint Training is another passive that we're coming across. It increases the distance for all charge-based skills or gap closers by 1 tile. Charge-based skills include dash, mutilating lunge, heroic charge, onrush, step aside, and distracting shot. It also has a passive bonus of minus 3% skills energy costs. What are your thoughts on this one, Darley?
So there's 2 kinds of passives, in my opinion. There are passives that affect an ability, and there's passives that are just kind of overall good for the play style. So Honed Edge is an example of the overall good for the play style because it buffs sword damage, This is one of those kinds of passives that directly affects another ability. So if that ability is good, and if it buffs it well, it's worth the point. If it doesn't, it's not. This is an example of one that is extremely good for its relevant ability, i.e. dash, because being able to get 1 more tile is just very, very nice. It gives you a lot more options when it comes to getting out of the way or getting within range. So I think this is almost always a pickup. If you pick up dash, you should always put a point in the sprint training because it also benefits those other weapon type abilities as well. Getting this with heroic charge is super nice, and onrush becomes godly with its ability to chase down anything. So yeah, I highly recommend this passive.
It almost starts making you look unnatural with how you're able to move forward on some of these.
Yeah.
It's 1 tile doesn't sound like a lot, but it makes a huge difference when you're playing with these skills. And it's really interesting. This is one of the few skills that explicitly says that it affects skills in other trees. So that's also really nice. This is definitely, especially if you're just picking up athletics as a side thing, if you're not trying to get too many points in, you're going on the left side of the tree, you really should be shooting for sprint training. And just getting mighty kick and elusiveness is good. Getting dash is definitely nice. But yeah, you might as well go for sprint training as well. So moving on, the next skill is Peak Performance. This is another passive. It grants plus 10% weapon damage, plus 10% dodge chance, and minus 10% skills cooldown as long as the amount of energy is higher than 75%. It also gives a passive bonus of plus 10 energy. What are your thoughts on this one?
So this is an example of what I had mentioned earlier about passives, how it can change playstyle or benefit playstyles. this isn't rooted to any particular one ability. It changes it's a modifier to your overall play. This, however, as much as I like peak performance, and I like it a lot, I think it's an underrated passive. It's one of those passives that is a caveat, right? If you don't have any kind of ability to restore energy, this ability isn't so great, because if you dip below 75%, you stop getting any kind of benefit from it. But if you have a very regular way of keeping your energy very high, it's a straight 10% weapon damage, which is equal to, I believe, 5 points? I think 5 points of strength, and then 10% dodge, which is hard to come by. And the reason that I like it so much, and that 10% skill cooldown, you get some very rare buffs from this, with the skills cooldown, and the dodge. I think this is an immensely good ability if you attempt to do a dodge build. Not so great for heavy armor. That's why I say it was for caveats, right? I have had this ability on heavy armor builds and still had a mediocre amount, a small amount of dodge to go along with it, but it shines so much better when you have a true dodge build. So this is designed for light armor, medium armor, dodge builds, not heavier armor builds.
Yeah, so, I think, well, and to get 10% dodge chance, naturally, if you put 2 points into dodge, you get 0.5% of dodge. So you basically have to spend 20 points to get the same effect. And I think part of this, especially because from here we branch out into the last 4 passes, which we'll go over, but it almost highlights that if you're going this far into athletics, you're probably going to want to use this as the base of your character because of the 75% energy. If you're using any other skill tree, whether that's maces, daggers, whatever, you're going to be using a lot of energy, and the majority of the time when you're fighting enemies, you're going to be very low at 50% or lower. So unless you're really just counting on this as being kind of an opening thing, I would imagine this would shine a lot more if you were just putting your points in athletics and letting your weapon do the work, rather than being concerned with using a bunch of skills. Especially if you pop off something like dodge to go towards the enemy, that's probably all you're really going to want to use if you want to make the most out of this passive.
I have to interrupt for a moment. What the hell?
You got a Gwendolyn's
I just pulled 2 Gwendolyn's elixirs, dude.
Wow.
Again. This happened to me in their video recently. That's crazy.
Yeah. That's pretty nuts.
Yeah, I agree. Basic attacking is probably a lot more attractive using peak performance, although it benefits all around play. Definitely it works with some builds better than others.
And it's another one of those, like you said, lighter armor, just because you will have more skill points. If you're going heavy armor, it's going to really be hard to keep your skill points up high. And then as soon as you pop off one skill, you're already pretty much going to be below 75%. Most of the weapon skills are pretty intensive on using skill points, whether that's 15, 20, 25. So, yeah, I think we're both in agreement there. This is a really good passive to have all around.
I like it a lot. Also, I have to make an amendment or addendum or something like that to my earlier statement concerning leg sweep. I've been using it, and if you just simply right-click the button, you don't actually have to move. So you can just leg sweep and then not move at all. It changes the ability a little bit.
Oh, okay.
It actually makes it more useful since you're not forced into a move.
That is the one kind of downside to being forced to move backwards, is especially since you're immobilizing them.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. Yeah, so we'll move on then to the next passive, which is Disengage. This passive decreases the chance of triggering attacks of opportunity by 30%. And for anyone unfamiliar with the term attacks of opportunity, this is basically when you retreat. If you're right up against an enemy and you retreat, an attack of opportunity is just them being able to attack you while you retreat. And you'll notice that most of the time this will happen, but not 100%. And if you're able to avoid it, then you'll actually you'll be able to make a little bit more distance than you normally would. And this one comes with a pretty good passive bonus of plus 3% dodge chance. So what are your thoughts on this one, Darley?
I'll be honest, this is one of those passives that I absolutely hate. Because it only comes into effect when you're losing. Typically it's like, I don't want to move away from my enemy. I want to be fighting them. And I hate the fact that this only has any kind of value when I move away from him. Maybe it's just because of my playstyle. Maybe this would be a little more useful with more of like a spear build or something along those lines. Definitely, of course it's good with leg sweep, because if you move away, you have less of a chance of provoking that attack opportunity. It only immobilizes them. I don't think it prevents counterattacks or attacks of opportunity. But I don't like it, Its only saving grace to me is that 3% dodge. That is it. Other than that, I'd say I veto this hard. I do not like it.
Yeah, I don't know that I would spend the point on it, considering it's just around attacks of opportunity. I could see if you've played a number of permadeaths and you're going for one of those dodge heavy light armor, and you keep running into bears in the forest, or you keep getting into these situations where enemies pop out from behind trees. I know that there's a lot of frustration around that. So in that case, this might be helpful. Also, if you are going dodge build, there is a point where you start to cap out your dodge, and you're really just looking to script and scrounge for any dodge points. So it might be worth the skill point, but generally I'm with you. I would definitely pass on this one, unless of course you're doing a full athletics build. Then that 3% dodge might be nice.
Yeah, like I said, only the dodge percent is attractive to me from this ability at all. If it had been different, I could actually tell you how to fix this passive. Like, maybe if they made it so that all basic attacks have a 30% chance of basically making you move back a tile, and that would make spear users really happy, But instead, it's, oh, well, if you have to move, you don't get hit 30% of the time. Oh, great. Not 100%, not 75%, not anything significant. It's 30%. And that's why I don't like it, It's just not good to me.
The only other time I could think of it being useful is in the troll fight. If you were trying to make a retreat or move back from the troll, to have that 1 in 3 chance that he's not going to swipe at you if you know that he's about to pull off that attack. There might be some value in it, but you would have dash, or you would have something like that where you would be able to get out of the way. So it's interesting that it's right next to leg sweep, because essentially you could just use leg sweep to back off one tile and get enough space to where attacks of opportunity wouldn't occur.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it might even be a little bit redundant other than for that passive bonus.
Maybe I'm even being selfish about it, but still, I don't like the ability as it is. Only the dodge is attractive.
Yeah, no, I feel you on that one. So we'll move on to probably one of the better skills in the tree. I was incorrect. There was one more active skill that I forgot about, and this is Adrenaline Rush. So Adrenaline Rush only costs 5 points to use, 5 energy points. It replenishes 10 to 30 energy, decreases pain by minus 10% to minus 20%, and applies the following effect for 2 to 4 turns. Minus 50% skills energy costs, plus 50% energy restoration, plus 20% crit chance, and plus 50% pain resistance. Each turn reduces all active cooldowns by 1. Each enemy within 2 tiles increases the effect's duration by 2 turns. What do you think of this one, Darley?
So you will quickly come to realize when it comes to combat mastery and athletics, they both share one thing in common at the very minimum, and that is they both have long cooldown buff skills. This is the oh crap button, basically. When you're in trouble, you want to activate this because you're only going to get it typically on one in one particular combat. Other than that, it goes on cooldown for a very long time, in this case 2 minutes. Of course, modified by your cooldown reductions and that sort of thing. It's very powerful for what it does, with the overall buffs that it gives. But it gives such an assortment. Sometimes I feel like I am at odds of when to use it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it kind of does everything. It gives you energy back. It gives you pain decrease, which I remember when I was fighting the troll, I had huge problems racking up too much pain from boulder toss and stuff like that. And then the powerful comeback ability of, crit chance and skill energy costs, it's kind of a catch-all. So, not to mention it actually helps even out your other cooldown curve since it reduces cooldowns. It's good. It's a good ability, but I often find myself not using it because I never run into anything that I have to use it against. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, looking at it, I've definitely never gotten this far into athletics. The 120 cooldown is pretty ridiculous, and you are right. There's a complementary skill in the combat mastery in the exact same position that we'll go over. But yeah, this is probably the biggest oh crap button in the entire game. I can imagine this being super useful in permadeath mode, though, because there are so many instances where you get into those oh crap moments where it's like, I don't have that button to push to ensure victory. And without that little button to push, sometimes you're just doomed to end the entire run. This seems like it's built to help in those situations. Or, yeah, basically any of this. You could get ganged up on an ambush. You could be fighting the final boss in the Manshire dungeon with the heavy armor and the sword and shield. You could be fighting the troll. And I imagine this would make a huge difference in rallying you back and making it so that you can pull through without dying.
I did fail to consider that, actually. The ramifications of using this in permadeath versus not permadeath. You're absolutely correct on that assessment. This is definitely worth a hell of a lot more in a permadeath situation. It becomes a saving grace for a lot of situations that you might end up finding yourself in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, and the thing too is you can even, the crit chance is ridiculous on its own, but you could almost just ignore that and use this to escape. So if you run into a bear and you're like, man, I could take on the bear, and he gets a good swipe on you and you're down to like 10%, you could pop this off and just make a run for it with the other skills, since their costs will be down. You're going to be getting more energy back, and then the pain resistance and reduction in pain. It all just kind of screams permadeath to me when I read through it. So,
I don't know if popping this off to escape a bear, unless you. Let me put it this way. Actually, this is not an ability you use when you're at 10% health. This is an ability you use when you're at 50 or 40, you know. It doesn't give enough damage reduction type stuff. You know, if you ever get that low, you want to use elusive. And then you immediately use dash, and then you run like hell. You know? But if you do get into a very tight fight, you know, where you need to have your skills coming back constantly, you need your energy to be pumping, you need a lot more crit, you know you're going to be facing pain from heavy hits from a bear, for example. This is a lifesaver. I would agree. But I definitely think if you're trying to pop it off at a very, very low percentage, do not use the ability. You're better off popping elusive and dash.
Yeah, that's a good point. It does say it's modified by the current health, but I can't tell from the description how exactly your current health modifies it, as it does not really say that there are any specific modifiers on here. So that's kind of interesting. But, all right, so moving on, we'll kind of shoot through these last three as quick as we can. The bottom left, and we'll probably agree this is one you can definitely skip. Never Again grants 33% fortitude upon receiving a negative physical or mental negative effect. The passive bonus being plus 5% fortitude. What are your thoughts on this one?
My thought is the name of the passive is appropriate. Never Again. Move on. This is a piece of crap.
Yeah, I don't know that you could justify digging a skill point into this passive, considering the other two that you have to choose from. Fortitude is really not going to make that huge of a difference on your character, or on your gameplay.
It's such a waste of a talent point. It's making me angry thinking about it. It is not worth it. It is in the same position as a keystone ability would be, the very end of a tree. Fortitude, whatever. It is awful. It is so bad. It makes me ill. Actually ill to consider it. Never Again is next, please.
Yeah, I think that's probably your strongest opinion on any of the skills so far.
What a piece of crap.
We'll move on. So the next one is Invigorating Violence. Yet again, another passive. And this one modifies Adrenaline Rush. So during the duration of Adrenaline Rush, killing enemies replenishes 5% max health, and it has the passive bonus of 3% weapon damage. What are your impressions of this one?
This one is misleading in its effectiveness, because even though, okay, let me put it this way: it gives good benefits, right? It gives good benefits to Adrenaline Rush. I like it, right? For that reason. I like getting back percentage max health, you know? I like plus 3% weapon damage. I don't like that it is affecting an ability that very rarely gets used, you know? It's super situational as to when you use it, and it's not okay, if it was attached to elusiveness, which we use all the time, every time 100% I'm putting that point into this. But we don't. We're putting it on an ability that rarely gets used because of its long cooldown. And again, like I said, situational benefits, you know. The 3% weapon damage is only equal to 1.5, I want to say. 1.5 strength, or maybe I forget the actual ratio. It's not worth that much strength. I think it's worth half the strength. So the passive bonus isn't that great either. So, but it's useful. See what I'm saying? It's useful, even if it's not that great. That being said, I would never put a point into this. I would never put a point into this because it's not worth a talent point. You can go into a different tree and get much better abilities than this. I would never waste the talent point for it.
Yeah, and I'm in total agreement here. I mean, it's a modifier on an ability that you're maybe going to be using once or twice during a dungeon run. You're lucky if you would be using it twice. And even against the troll fight, you would only pop this off once. So it's really hard to justify using the skill point.
Yeah.
But of the three, we're coming to the final, and this is probably where you would want to use your skill point. This is another one of those kind of oh crap buttons, but it automatically triggers for you. It's inner reserves. So if the amount of energy you have is lower than 15%, it will replenish 25% of your max energy. And the caveat being the effect can only trigger once per 60 turns, and it has a passive bonus of plus 2% energy restoration. What are your thoughts on this one, Darley?
So this is another passive ability. This one is sans a caveat because we're not reliant on actually using an ability in order to get its effects, which is good. So it affects more of a play style. In other words, in this one, you can let your energy run out and still get some energy back, no problem. That being said, I don't think I've ever actually gotten to use this ability. I don't think I've ever actually put a point into it because I didn't want to waste the point. I've always been good enough at managing my energy that I've always felt that I never would need to use it. The inner reserves. It's useful, don't get me wrong. But I personally have never given it enough credit. So my opinion on this is a bit skewed. I would pass it up personally.
And I agree with you. I think I would definitely pass on this one too. If you did have to spend one on these last three, it would be this one. But it is really weird how you start off so strong in athletics, and then when you get to the bottom, the passives are just so weak in comparison to what you get at the beginning.
Yeah.
The main issue that I have with this particular passive is that it will pop off whenever. So Adrenaline Rush is useful in that if you're in that bad situation in permadeath mode, the screen's going red, your health is going down. It's nice to be like, oh, well, I've got the skill to pop off. If you're in that same situation and you're needing more energy, this could have popped off while fighting just a normal guy, especially if you're using a lot of your skill, your weapon skills, your active skills. So I think we're in the unique position here where we're at the end of the skill tree, and I think all three are really hard passes. You'd be better served putting your points somewhere else than any of these last 3 points.
I absolutely agree. I do agree with what you said. The inner reserves has some merit. It's just it's still not worth a talent point. A talent point being worth a lot more overall. I could see going all the way down to Adrenaline Rush and then just calling it there.
Exactly.
Athletics is super front loaded on its abilities. All the good stuff is at the front. So every point near the front, I can see being definitely worth it.
Yeah. And it is interesting in comparison to Combat Mastery, where the best skill is one of the final points and will actually be the final skill that we go over today. So, having gone through athletics, there's no weapons for us to go through because we're not looking at any weapons today. So we are going to shoot straight on over to Combat Mastery. And so we're going to be looking at the first skill, which has quite a lot going on with it. Seize the Initiative. So this is an attack. When you deliver a successful strike, you will create a condition or a buff on yourself called Seized Initiative, which will give you 2.5% accuracy, minus 3.5% fumble chance, minus 5% cooldown duration, and minus 5% ability energy costs. The target that gets hit with the attack gets initiative loss. This gives them minus 2.5% dodge chance, plus 3.5% fumble chance, plus 5% to cooldown duration, and a plus 5% ability energy cost. Each successful attack against the target grants 1 stack of these effects, up to 6 stacks. The effect lasts until the target affected by initiative loss either dies or leaves your vision. Receiving initiative loss removes seized initiative. There's a hidden bonus. The attack has plus 25% accuracy, and there is a passive cooldown, and a passive bonus of minus 5% cooldown duration for this skill tree. Having said all that, what are your impressions of this one?
I've been a fan of this ability ever since it came out. Just reading about the massive amount of buffs that you get and the massive amount of debuffs that you put on your opponent, enough is worth it enough, because it's just a huge swing. You get the ability to hit more accurately. They get debuff to be hit more accurately. It doesn't matter that it only hits one person, because this thing is on a relatively low cooldown of 10. So you can use it quite often against every foe that you come across in battle, because its own cooldown reduction is helping decrease its cooldown. Add on the fact that it had a bonus of 25%, the fact that it's not dependent upon any ability to get better or worse. It's just that good. It's one of the best abilities in the game. I love it. It's good. Super good.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely one of the best starting abilities, hands down. I think most people would choose, if they had to choose between Mighty Kick and Seize the Initiative, will go Seize the Initiative every time. It is a very interesting attack in that it gives you a buff and debuffs the enemy at the same time. And as I said towards the beginning, after Trollslayer, a number of the enemies, bandits, wolves, and other folk that you fight, actually gain access to a number of these abilities, and Seize the Initiative is one of those. And one of the nice things about it is if the enemy uses Seize the Initiative on you and you gain initiative loss, you can just use Seize the Initiative and pop it back on them and basically flip the tables on them. And they're not going to be able to do the same until their cooldown gets far enough, but usually they'll be dead by that point. So it's almost a game of chicken. Go into the fight, wait a turn or two to see. I think it's mostly the crooks, or the guys with the daggers that look pretty shady. They're the ones that generally have Seize the Initiative. Very strong skill. Even if you're not going to go combat mastery, if you're playing early on in the game and you haven't gotten level 2 treaties for any of your main weapon skills, and you spent all the points you can, this is a absolute go-to if you need to offload a skill point and you don't want to wait for that second treatise.
I agree. And there's also the consideration of your longer cooldown, like we were talking about. What was it called? The Adrenaline Rush. Adrenaline Rush has a 2-minute cooldown, but not with this going, because it does give you a general buff of cooldown, right? So it should also cut down in any cooldowns that you have or use during that time. You can actually get longer cooldowns to be reasonable using this one. So it has a lot of uses across all trees.
I hadn't really thought about that. If you were popping this off frequently enough, then something like Adrenaline Rush would come back to you a lot quicker.
Mm-hmm. Like something with a 20 cooldown suddenly becomes a 12 cooldown. That's a heck of a lot more manageable if you have a fully ramped up Seize, and you keep that buff long enough to be able to use abilities with it too. It's not like you're just making your opponent disappear. Now, obviously, the stronger you get, the less effective it becomes, but who cares? You're killing stuff left and right at that point.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think we've got enough kind words for this one. This is definitely a go-to for any starting character. And it's not a point wasted. You'll always find an opportunity to pop this off. So moving on, the next two skills are unique in that they're both stance-based skills. So we have offensive tactic. We'll go over that one first. I will start off by saying that part of offensive tactic and defensive tactic is that you can only have one or the other. You can't have both active, which that is actually listed in the description here. So, offensive tactic activates the following effect, which persists as long as there are enemies within vision. It gives plus 4% counter chance, plus 4% crit chance, plus 3% accuracy, minus 5% abilities energy costs, minus 5% cooldown duration. Critical strikes and counterattacks reduce all active cooldowns for weapon-based abilities by 1 turn. For each enemy within vision, receive 1 stack of the effect, up to 5 stacks. The amount of stacks is calculated dynamically based on the number of enemies within vision. And as I stated, you can only have 1 tactic activated at a time. It also has a passive bonus of minus 5% cooldown duration for the skills in the combat mastery tree. What are your thoughts on this one, Darley?
So it's very easy to confuse the tactics, offensive, defensive tactics, as being similar to stance, right? Stances, which of course are the primary buffing method that all trees will typically have, when you go fencer stance, etc. But this is very, very different. This is a much longer lasting buff. It will last the entire fight. That being said, since we don't actually have to do stance dancing or anything to keep our stances up, I find this to be kind of like a superior buff in that respect to the stances. It gives a lot of different small benefits, all of which are good. Who doesn't want more counter? Who doesn't want more crit? Who doesn't want more accuracy? It's just good all around. Where it really shines, this ability, is when we get into the white text underneath all the green, where it says critical strikes and counterattacks, reducing cooldowns. That's a very unique ability. No matter what way you slice it, being able to reduce your cooldowns, as we had mentioned earlier, for example, let's say with Seize the Initiative, with Seize the Initiative, you could turn a 20 cooldown into a 12 cooldown. Well, if you use this, any criticals and counters you're using basically are ticking it down by one, and that means you're going to be able to use even more abilities even sooner. If you have stuff on a super low cooldown, you can basically spam those. So this has some untapped potential depending on your build. I very much highly rate offensive tactics in that regard.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, it speaks for itself. The one disadvantage, though, that I will point out is with it being effective while enemies are in vision. There are times in which enemies will pop out of your line of vision and then pop back in, and this will drop, and the cooldown is 25 turns, so you won't be turning it back on. I have seen people complain about this, saying that there should be like a 1 turn leeway, but on the other hand, this is so much stronger than any other stance that you would normally get. It almost seems fair enough that is the one downside to it. And we'll go over defensive tactics, but most of the time when I'm doing my builds, especially melee builds, I almost completely skip the stance-based skills and focus either on offensive or defensive tactic, depending on what I'm doing with the build.
I had not considered that by what people have been talking about, that it should have a leeway, but I understand where they're coming from. So I can kind of agree with both sides. On one hand, you're not exactly changing how you fight. Why are you losing your buff that you took a turn to spend on? On the other hand, you failed your tactics if you actually got out of line of sight. At that point you were running or something. So, when in reality most of us are just repositioning. So, it's a yes and no on that argument for me. But I still think this is worth the talent point each and every time.
Yeah, and there's basically two situations I can think of. One being in the forest. It's very easy to lose track of enemies, especially if you're liking the stacks and having this work for multiple enemies. There's an enemy there, but it's blocked. Your vision's blocked, so you can't see it. And also, I imagine in dungeons, sometimes when you're trying to kite enemies out of a specific room, you might have this on just long enough for one, and then it drops off because the other one's not falling enough behind enough. But again, it goes to the whole idea of it being a tactic, and that you really need to be careful on how and when you apply it, especially with that 25 cooldown. It's going to take a while for you to get it back, definitely after whatever battle you're in.
Yeah.
So moving on to the other complement to this, the defensive tactic, basically the same, but with different caveats to it. So activates as long as the enemy is within your vision. It gives plus 4% dodge chance or block chance. The priority is given to the highest of the two. It gives plus 5% fortitude, minus 3.5 damage taken, plus 5% bleed resistance, plus 5% stun resistance, and plus 5% knockback resistance. Blocking and dodging replenishes 5% max energy. And the same as before, for each enemy within vision, it stacks up to 5 stacks. It's calculated dynamically based on the number of enemies within the vision. And as I said before, you can only have one or the other. And it also has the minus 5% cooldown duration for the skill tree. So, having said that, Darley, which of the two would you pick if we had to do a versus on offensive versus defensive tactic? Which one are you going to go with?
Offensive.
See, I'm actually the opposite. I really like getting that max energy back. I mean, I could definitely drop the fortitude, but that plus 4% dodge chance, and if you have 4 or 5 enemies, I mean, your dodge is it's skyrocketing, and you're getting all of your energy back. That's typically why I have used offensive, but I do tend to lean defensive, and especially when fighting against the troll or larger enemies, having that additional defense is nice. Considering most of the time you are putting a lot into offense already, so it's kind of a nice backup to that.
I agree. I mean, I like defensive tactics, don't get me wrong. I just feel like I go with offensive for a specific reason, and that is because it is more useful to many more builds than defensive tactic is. Defensive tactic to me, because of its damage taken bonus, because of its resistance bonuses and stuff like that, and its dodge and block bonuses, and the fact that it, like I said, when you get below the green, that's when you see the interesting thing. So in this case, blocking and dodging replenishes energy. That is a great ability, but that is an ability meant for defensive builds. We're talking shields, we're talking people who go natural dodge and are working towards dodge. If you're not concerned necessarily with that, or you don't use a shield, offensive is useful. Even if you go a defensive build, offensive is still useful. Not so for defensive tactic for everybody else. That's why defensive tactic is better in my opinion. And I also highly, highly rate cooldown reduction stuff and crit in general, and offensive gives that. So that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I mean, the way that I always look at these is they really complement whatever your build is. So if you've got full armor on, you're really not get the defensive tactics really not going to do much for you. So you would want to pop off offensive tactic. But if, for instance, you're going dual wield and you have almost no protection other than your dodge, then defensive tactic is going to really help to fill in the gap for all the damage that you're dealing, and just kind of, like I said, just give a little bit more of an oomph of defense.
I know what you mean, but I would also like to know, you said full armor. So, like, you can go full armor without a shield, but defensive tactics specifically states you need to be able to block or dodge. Just having the armor wouldn't necessarily benefit for you. So, like a two-handed greatsword or a staves build, unless you get those blocking options, defensive is useless. You know, I still think that 5% max energy return is really, really good, but to me, it just doesn't compare. I almost always get offensive because I want to kill my opponent, you know?
Yeah. Well, we're definitely divided on this one. So we'll move on from here to the next three, which are all passives. So the first is Armor Crusher. Attacks against targets with their armor durability over 50% receive plus 10% armor penetration and plus 40% armor damage. When the target's armor durability reaches 0%, it's applied with 15% damage taken for 5 turns. And this comes with a passive bonus of plus 5% armor damage. What are your thoughts on this one?
This is one of those abilities that is just nice and sweet to have when you play any kind of like melee type build. The biggest difference that I've ever noticed on it was whenever I fought the heavily armored bosses or armored guys in the Manshire Human Dungeon, and in particular the Troll, because this helped me cleave through his armor big time. I think this is a good ability to have, but again, it's situational. I do think it's worth a talent point, but you will obviously get more benefit from it depending on what you're fighting. Situational, but it gives so much, right? It gives so much, it's still worth that talent point to me. I like this ability.
Yeah, and that is a good point. It does give a lot, and it does seem to be a complement to offensive tactics, which is very nice. I have put a point into this before, and it definitely has paid off. Like you said, it's very situational, but it does give you a lot for those situations. So, especially when you're getting towards endgame, armor damage and armor penetration play a big role compared to early dungeons where it's really not going to matter that much. So, moving on to the next skill, this is a complement of the 2 tactics. This is stance training. So, if you have defensive tactic active, all stance-based skills have 3 stacks on activation. If you have offensive tactic active, using applicable skills additionally grants plus 1 stack to their respective stances. It has the passive bonus of plus 2% energy restoration. So the idea being here that with defensive tactic, if you were to pop off something like Massacre or Fencer Stance, you won't start with 1 stack, you will start with 3. And with offensive tactic, typically with the different stances, using the skills will give plus 1. So in this plus 1 stack, so in this instance, it will actually give plus 2 to the stacks each time you're using a skill for that respective tree. What are your thoughts on this one, Darley?
So what's interesting about this is a gateway skill, right? Unless you intend to only get season initiative and a tactic, you're going to take stance training because you don't get any other skills beyond here unless you take it. So it's a given, right? You have to take it. That being said, the skill's worth it. You know, if in particular, no. It's a necessary skill if you do stances, I think. I think in order to make stances really worth it, to get the most out of them, you need this. Regardless of which tactic you end up going. I do like this skill, and I do think it's worth the point. If nothing else, than to just continue on with the tree. But the fact that it does provide a really great benefit and makes stances viable makes it very highly rated, in my opinion.
Yeah, and this makes me think that you're basically going to have two schools of thought here. You're either going to heavily rely on your stance, or you're going to use your weapon skills, because popping off defensive or offensive tactic plus your stance is going to eat up about half of your skill points before you even engage in the fight. So that's what this makes me almost think. If you're gonna go into combat, there's really two lines of thinking. Either you're heavily relying on the stances, or you're more reliant on the skills. I mean, you definitely can still use your skills, but the nice thing about this is it essentially gives you the effect of using skills with your respective stance without actually having to use them. Well, except for in the case of offensive tactic. But even if you just pop off one, because that's usually the issue that I run into, is when I pop off a stance, I usually don't have a lot of energy. So you really end up only using one or two skills, so your stacks don't get very high. But with this, I mean, it could get pretty crazy. So, what are your thoughts?
It really depends on how energy efficient your build is. If you have staves or swords or something, or axes, where you get a crazy amount of energy regeneration, then you can afford to do putting up a tactic, going into a stance, running in, using an ability, slam them and get all that energy back, and then keep on going. If you are not energy efficient, you're absolutely right. These skills can be fairly energy hungry if you're not careful. You may end up ruining, your ability to use peak performance or something along those lines, where you're required to have a certain amount of energy. But overall, the tactics are going to be worth it, I think, to always put up. And then the stances are situational, because not all stances are equal.
Yeah, definitely. So going on to the next passive, this one is called Setup. We have talked about this one before when we were talking about spears. Basically, skipping a turn grants plus 10% accuracy, plus 10% weapon damage for 2 turns, with a passive bonus of minus 3% fumble chance. What are your thoughts on this one, Darley?
I thought I would like this one a lot more when it first came out. But when it first came out, I never wasted a point on it, because I was always bringing the fight to the enemy. That changed with spears. Setup, in my opinion, shines when you do spears, or if you do ranged weapons like the crossbows and whatnot, where you just want to sit there and maybe skip a turn just so that you can get this bonus going. In that respect, you kind of think of it not as a wasted turn. You think of it as setting up a buff. It's the same as actually using a turn for defensive or offensive tactic, except it's a 2-turn buff that you get for free. That's how I think of it at any rate. That being said, even though I like it, I like the effects, especially after spears and crossbows came out, I still find myself never putting a point into it. I just have more important things to get. So, unfortunately, and of course, I have a pinch out for offensive over defensive. I still never end up getting this. I know it's good. I just never get it.
Yeah, I think a lot of the misconception with it is that by skipping a turn, you're skipping a turn. But in essence, this is like having an extra active ability, but there is no cost to it other than just standing still. So yeah, it really shines with spears and with ranged attacks. I would even say some of the athletics tree seems to kind of set up nicely for this, and maybe even maces and staves with their knockback and daze abilities.
Yeah,
But
because you're gonna sit like at the edge of a dungeon hall, and you're gonna wait for them to come in line. Then you kick them into the wall, and it still gives you a whole turn to get that bonus damage and accuracy. And then when you just start beating their head in after they get stunned. So yeah, it's definitely good. It fits its name, setup. So
yeah, it's a really underrated skill. I think I definitely have not come across using it yet. But after our discussion of spears on the last podcast, I was really kicking myself that I didn't think to use this one. It's one that I think most people will pass up and not give a second thought about. They'll probably just go from defensive tactics thought to stance training. But this might even be, like I said, a good if you're doing athletics and you're looking at those last three skill trees, you might want to go down the right side here of combat mastery to get some of these skills, as they're quite good as well as the beginning part of the athletics tree.
Agreed.
So moving on, we're going to the next line of the skills, and we're moving on to Warcry. This is another active ability with an area of effect of 21 by 21 tiles. It unleashes a Warcry, dealing 2 times magic power psionic damage to all surrounding enemies within an area of effect. It applies weakness to each effective enemy for 10 turns. The weakness debuff gives the enemy minus 15% weapon damage, minus 15% crit chance, minus 15% crit efficiency, minus 15% block chance, minus 25% block power. Then you receive battle rage for 5 turns, plus 1 additional turn per affected enemy. It has a passive bonus of minus 5% cooldown duration for the skill tree. What are your thoughts on this one?
I find it hilarious that the damage component is based off of magic power. I never knew that until today, but I started thinking about it, and I'm like, so wait a minute. If I go full willpower, Jonah... we could get a fairly high damage Warcry going on here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Assuming we got her up to like level 11 or something, and we used every single one of her skill points on a spell. Some ridiculous build. Well, actually, we couldn't use all of the skill points for spells, because we would actually have to go down and pick up Warcry itself. But I should like this ability. I almost never get it. I've only gotten it once, and I didn't care for it, because even though I knew that it was doing a great job, and I mean, don't get me wrong, the debuff of that it gives weakness is very strong. I just didn't like it. I didn't like actually taking a turn to use Warcry. It didn't feel intuitive to me. Now, this is me being completely facetious. My own feeling here, everything in my brain says this is a good ability. I should be singing its praises. It gives the enemies debuffs, it gives you a buff, the damage is negligible, but it does everything that C's initiative does, except it does it to a wide range of people. I should like this, but for some reason, I never get it.
Yeah, I got pretty close to getting this on my dual wield build. I really wanted to. I ended up spending the skills elsewhere and really didn't want to level up much past where I was at. But after after our conversation here, I'm almost thinking, because I'm going to be doing a pyromancy build next, I'm almost tempted to try to sink 4 points into combat mastery just to get Warcry. The main reason that I'm thinking that is in a situation of ambush, if you know the enemies are closing in on you, and maybe you don't. I mean, generally, if you're going pyromancer, you get high enough level, it doesn't really matter. I mean, you're just gonna wreck everybody. But it does give you that additional assurance. You do some damage on them, and then when they do try to come and hit you, it's gonna be way less. So I don't know, something about it. I almost want to do it just for the fun of it. I've wanted to try to use Warcry just to see what it looks like, because I imagine it would be funny. I always thought it would be nice if there. I mean, it's very powerful, but to have some kind of debuff to scare the enemy or confuse them, maybe even have them try to retreat because they're scared of your loud shouting. It sounds like a really fun ability. It's definitely one I want to try to get into one of my builds.
It sounds like a fun build if you actually went like a willpower focused Warcry build. Because, you know, I mean, it is in its own way, it is a damage spell, you know. It just starts at a very low percentage. You know, you would have to really pump it up. But, like, I mean, it's kind of a hit all around you mega fireball in that respect, you know. It's just that other abilities will probably outperform it damage-wise. It could still be a good opener. We'll see, you know. I say go for it. Give it a try.
Yeah, just as something unique. I mean, I'm looking at the Pyromancy skill tree. To get all of the main spells, if you get all of the treaties you need, spend about 6 or 7 points. So you could potentially go Combat Mastery, Warcry, but you wouldn't be getting any of the passive bonuses, which are quite nice for Magic. So for Pyromancy. So we'll see. It could be something fun to try at least. A Warcry Pyromancer. And it's notable that I think this is one of the few, if not the only, skills that actually does psionic damage, since we don't have Psimancy yet in the game. So that could be fun as well, to claim yourself to be a Psimancer just by having Warcry.
Do they actually call that Psimancy?
Yeah, I thought that was what it was called.
Psionic.
Oh, Psionic.
Yeah. I was like, wow, I didn't know that.
Oh no, it's called, if you look at the treaties, it's called Psimancy.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, it's gonna be one of the
magic
trees when they start adding more magic, which is probably gonna come after Way Forward, so it's gonna be quite a while. But
usually when they do Mancy, it refers to like a magic type school. So I'm not used to hearing it like that. I'm used to it being just psionics, right?
Yeah.
So
no, there's a few of them that are a bit interesting, and then like Venomancy, I wasn't really expecting that. Or Astromancy, I'm not sure. Are you just pulling meteors from the sky, or what's that going to involve? So
probably like star-based magic or something.
Probably.
I'm kind of hoping with Psimancy they do something really cool, like you can rip like shelves off the wall or pick up barrels and throw them at opponents with your mind.
We're kind of getting off topic here, but the main ability I'm hoping that Psimancy has is the ability to turn enemies against each other. So you could actually brainwash one of the bandits to attack another bandit. I think that would be pretty sick.
Yeah.
But we'll keep that for another discussion. We'll move on from Warcry onto the next skill, Thirst for Battle. This is an active skill. It activates the following effect for 8 turns. For each missing percent of health, receive plus 0.3% weapon damage, plus 0.15 crit chance, plus 0.2% life drain, plus 0.3% energy drain. The power of the effect is calculated dynamically based on the amount of health. Killing an enemy prolongs the duration of the effect by 2 turns, and has a normal passive bonus of minus 5% cooldown duration for the skill tree. What are your thoughts on this one, Darley?
So this is another example of a oh shit button, basically, or oh crap. Sorry, my language and all. It is best used when you do it when you are halfway dead, right? Because you don't want to get so low that they just kill you with the next shot. But it is enough right? That if you start dealing big damage, that you can basically climb your way back out from the weeds, so to speak. I've gone up against bears and I've hit this, and I came out golden just because of this. So this is definitely a good ability, and it's definitely worth the point, in my opinion. And of course, with, combat mastery being somewhat linear, straight down, you kind of have to take it, but it's not a wasted point. It's a good ability.
Yeah, I agree. This is definitely a point well spent. I as well have used this a number of times and really saved my butt. Like for instance, if you're at 50% health, life drain, you're going to be getting 10%. Energy drain is going to be even more than that. Same with weapon damage. I mean, it's an oh crap button, but it only has 20 turn cooldown compared to Adrenaline Rush or the one below it, which we'll go over shortly. I definitely rate this one highly. I use this one on the troll with my spear build, and it helped a lot.
Yes, agreed.
So moving on from there, going to the next line, we have the passive modifier for Warcry called Intimidation. Warcry receives 25% chance to daze or confuse all effective enemies for 2 to 3 turns. Has the passive bonus of plus 3% fortitude. So this is actually what I was talking about. I totally forgot that there is that passive which will do daze and confuse if you do Warcry. But what are your thoughts on this one, Darley?
So this one actually makes Warcry even more attractive, particularly when we were talking about the applications of daze and confuse. If you think of daze as being the precursor to stun, and confuse basically just being kind of like a replacement for stun, this has a lot of potential in that respect. That being said, the passive bonus, in my opinion, is useless. I don't care about the 3% fortitude at all. You would only ever take this if you intended to actually try and use Warcry all the time. If you didn't use Warcry all the time, not so great. But honestly, like I said before, Warcry is a good ability. It's just a matter of, are you going to use it? If you use it, great. If not, skip it.
Yeah, exactly. No, I don't have much to add other than what you said. I think what it gives to Warcry almost eliminates the negativity to the passive bonus, to where I can overlook the fortitude bonus. But yeah, we'll see. If I do go Warcry Pyromancer, I might have to look at using 5 points just to get that daze confused. That would be nice.
I will say this when it comes to abilities in general, and I don't like it when I have to spend 2 talent points to make one ability worth it. Right? I like it when my extra ability points that modify it, for example, when we go from dash to sprint training. Sprint training affects a lot of different abilities, not just dash. I'm getting more bang for my buck, so to speak. Intimidation makes battle cry or war cry, even more worth it than it already is. But it's kind of on the borderline of making me dislike that because I have to spend 2 points, right, in order to get my final ability. And maybe that's one of the reasons why I never pick it as much as I ought to.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even mind if the daze and confuse chance was low on Warcry. If it was only 5%, I would still be happy with that, as opposed to having to spend an additional skill point. But there are a number of skills like that, even within the weapon trees as well. And we even saw that in athletics with sudden lunge. It was much better if you got the additional skill point. So in essence, you're getting a skill that costs 2 points and not 1. So definitely something to consider as you're building out your character. So we'll go on to the next one, which is the counter to Adrenaline Rush. This is against the odds. It is another oh crap button, 120 turn cooldown. It activates the following effect for 2 turns. Health can no longer drop below 10%, and killing an equal or more powerful enemy replenishes 20% max health and energy. It has a minus 5% cooldown duration, passive bonus for any skill in the tree. What are your impressions of this one?
So this one reminds me of in World of Warcraft, paladins get a ability called the Bubble. It's basically a divine shield that prevents all damage for a certain amount of time. And this is basically exactly like that. For 2 rounds, you're unkillable, right? Because your life just can't go below a certain percentage. The fact that it gives you the mechanic that if you do kill something that you can get your energy back is very, very nice. So it definitely makes this ability more useful the more ganged up you are. But honestly, when you reach that point, you're going to be in a state of panic anyway. You're going to be wondering, how in the world am I going to get out of this mess, more than can I kill anybody to get out of this. It has saved me against the troll, and I think that this ability is best used against tough bosses more than trying to take on a multitude of enemies. But it really does its job perfectly in saving your butt when it comes to almost dying. If you're about to die, if you're at 20%, smash against the odds so they can't hurt you anymore, and then you do whatever you can to survive, whether it means dashing away, popping a Gwendolyn, or chugging down vivifying essence, whatever you can do. For me in particular, if I don't have it up already, this is where Thirst for Battle comes into play, and then I start hoping for big crits. But if I'm playing correctly, Thirst for Battle already came into play. This is probably when I start using potions. Very powerful potions. But definitely, probably one of the best long cooldown abilities in the game, if not the best long cooldown ability in the game for survival.
So again, I would almost think, what if we had to choose between 2, Adrenaline Rush and Against the Odds, since they are very similar, they're in the same spot, and they're basically that oh crap moment of I'm about to die. Which one do you choose?
Well, I definitely think they have different functions compared to one another. One heals a multitude of things, energy, pain, etc. It gives you basically a huge set of buffs that will hopefully pull your fat out of the fryer. Against the Odds simply prevents you from getting your fat in the fryer. So if you don't have a way to do that, if you don't have basically a backup plan, you're dead in 2 turns. I think Adrenaline Rush overall is more useful, but I play permadeath all the time, right? I think Against the Odds is just better for staying in the game. And whether you play adventure or permadeath, I think that's what most people want. I know a lot of people hate dying. I know a lot of people hate losing, hours worth of progress just because they didn't go and save at an inn or rest at a camp. Whereas if they had Against the Odds, they would have a chance, Sometimes it just comes down to that one last hit. And Against the Odds gives you 2 turns for that hit. So I'm going with Against the Odds. I like it better.
Yeah, I see your point. I would, on the contrary, probably pick Adrenaline Rush. I do see the point of having the guaranteed extra 2 turns. I just like all of the additional bonuses that you got from Adrenaline Rush in comparison. But
yeah, that's very fair too. So I don't blame you for that assessment. period. I think that's a very good salient point. When it comes to it down to Adrenaline Rush is a lot more usable because of all those nice buffs you get. So
Yeah, definitely. Well, and it reduces the active cooldowns, decreases pain, gives you additional energy. Huge bonus to crit chance. You do get addition. I do think and we'll go into it. I think the additional passive connected to against the odds is much better than the one for Adrenaline Rush, but it might be to kind of equalize the two or something like that. But so we're getting to the end here. So the next one, Opportune Moment. Each successful hit has a 10% chance to reduce active cooldowns by 1 turn, and it has the passive bonus of plus 3% accuracy. What are your thoughts on this one?
I really liked this when it first came out. But the more I played with it, the more, because like I said before, I'm a big fan of being able to reduce my cooldown so that I can spam my abilities more, right? But the more I used it, the more it was like, how often is that 10% actually going to come up? Well, in the grand scheme of things, it comes off very often, right? But the more I played, the less I prioritized it because I wanted to reserve talent points. That's pretty much the only reason why I like this passive. I like the passive bonus. It's just I felt like I was getting more bang for my buck in other talent, using my talent point elsewhere. That is the only reason I would pass this up and have passed it up. So I'm kind of like ambivalent, if that makes sense, overall towards this passive. It doesn't get me excited. It simply is okay to good, and not enough to make me go, I have to have it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think as far as the passives that we've seen, and there's definitely less passives in Combat Mastery, there's definitely more active skills. This is probably lower on the priority list, especially when you take into account the opportunity cost of, am I going to use my points here? Am I going to use my points here or over there? You're probably going to want to sink the point against the odds just to get to the final skill we'll go over. So I think this is definitely one of those ones you can pass. It's nice to have, but it's not going to make or break your build.
Agreed.
So moving on to the final row of skills, we have the modifier to against the odds called Final Push. Final Push, while against the odds is active, all attacks receive plus 20% accuracy and plus 20% weapon damage, and it has a nice passive bonus of plus 10% healing efficiency. What are your thoughts on this one, Darley?
Amazingly, I don't care about this ability. I think it gives good bonuses for the talent point of the accuracy and weapon. But it's the same reason I could not get hype about any of those passives that actually affected Adrenaline Rush, because I was wasting another talent point to buff something to a level that I felt it probably should have already been at to begin with. This passive is very passable to me. It gives good benefits, but I hate the fact I have to spend 2 talent points to make something worthwhile when against the odds kind of already does what I need it to, and that is to survive, So I pass this up every time.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes back to what we were saying about Adrenaline Rush. You're only going to be using against the odds every so often. It's not going to be used a lot. Skill point can definitely be used elsewhere. And it's almost like if this was part of against the odds, I would almost favor against the odds over Adrenaline Rush. But because it's a modifier, definitely a big pass from me.
Mm-hmm.
So going on to the next one, this is the final active skill of the tree called Finisher. finisher delivers a strike of plus 25%, or delivers a strike with plus 25% accuracy. If this skill manages to kill its target, it immediately refreshes all active cooldowns. And it has a passive bonus of minus 5% cooldown duration for this skill tree. What are your thoughts on this one?
So I want to like this ability more. I almost never use it because I'm already using Seize Initiative. I'm already using Seize Initiative, and I'm already using my other skill tree's active abilities. And for the same reason that Seize Initiative is good in that it's not beholden to a particular skill, this kind of is set back by the fact that it's not beholden to a particular ability trait or something, or attribute. It's just a straight up hit. It just has plus 25% accuracy. They have to be near dead, and it's only to refresh all your active cooldowns. That is good. That is an extremely powerful effect, but I still find myself never using finisher to finish people. It's usually they're going down from a large hit or something like that, and I never get to properly time it. So because I'm lacking in the timing, I'm getting no use out of it, and thus it becomes a wasted talent point for me. I hate that because this ability is good, especially that part of refreshing all active cooldowns. If it had a damage bonus, it would be very worth it, but because it doesn't, it's unreliable as a finisher in that respect.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the only bonus is the 25% accuracy. Typically, when we're seeing attacks like this, we're seeing that as a hidden bonus, not outright stated. It makes sense if this is your final attack that you would want as much accuracy as possible. It is a little bit confusing reading it and being like, okay, well, should I get like more weapon damage or like crit chance or something like that? But it is nice that it will refresh all the active cooldowns. But getting to the end of the tree, running low on skill points, I agree with you. I think this is one that you can skip. It kind of reminds me of Flurry of Blows in the dual wield tree, which we'll go over in another episode. But there's a passive modifier on that one to where if Flurry of Blows ends basically kills the enemy, that it refreshes the cooldown. I found that very useful. But again, that's a skill point really early on in the tree compared to you got to get all the way down here. And we're both going to be in agreement. When you're at against the odds and you're looking at where you're going to spend your next skill point, it is not going to be finisher or final push. It is going to be our very last skill, probably one of the best passive skills in the game. We're talking about Right on Target. Right on Target gives all weapon-based abilities 5% accuracy, minus 5% fumble chance, and plus 5% crit chance. If one of your weapon slots is empty, you also receive plus 35% weapon damage, plus 10% accuracy, plus 10% crit chance, minus 10% fumble chance, and minus 10% skills energy costs. There's also the passive bonus of minus 5% skill energy cost, which is quite rare. I don't know that I've seen that most of the time. It's cooldown duration. I know you probably have some very strong thoughts on this one, Darley, so what are they?
Just as a clarification, I did look up this ability and ask about it. They did clarify to me, I think it's the 10%. The 10% skill energy cost is not actually applied. That is a bug.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we are not actually getting that. We are getting everything else, though. And I have tested that out. To elaborate on what you said, when I saw this ability when this first came out, I fell in love immediately. I knew I had to play it. It was the very first build I tried, and Holy crap, I love this damn ability. If you're going to go single weapon at all that isn't a two-hander, this is the necessary talent for you. I have gushed about this on my videos about how strong it is, the actual value, the numerical value that you're getting out of a single talent point. Now, obviously, it takes 6 total talent points in order to get down here. It's a keystone ability, right? It is the very end of the tree. It is a defining ability, and it shows. 35% weapon damage is the same as investing like 17.5 strength. The accuracy is like the same as like what 20 agility. The crit is 20 agility. The fumble, the whole package. It's such a huge statistical advantage. It outshines damage, I think, from almost any weapon comparison that I've looked at. If you put it on an axe or like a high-end sword or mace, something along the lines of 35 in damage, you get such a big bonus that you are just cleaving guys left and right, and top that on the fact that you're getting an additional 5% accuracy, fumble, and crit off your weapon abilities. 15% crit off one talent point is huge, particularly if you build your build around abusing the critical effects of your weapon, like maces, like axes, like swords. It's huge. It's a really big ability. Love the stam ability. 7 out of 5. I can't praise it enough. I love it. It's so good.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely one of the most powerful skills in the game. I've almost considered seeing if I can sort of re-roll my Arna Mace's character to drop the shields, just to go more into combat mastery to get to this one, because that seems way more appealing than using shields. Yeah, I mean, there's really nothing else to say about this. I mean, especially if you're wanting to just use one-handed weapon, if you're wanting to use a sword or dagger or whatever with just with no shield, or you don't want to dual wield, that's not appealing to you. This is probably more important than any of the weapon skills or other skills within the weapon tree that you select.
Absolutely agree. I basically think of it as, instead of using a greatsword, what if you could use a regular weapon as a two-hander? Since you have to free your other hand up. So that, in my opinion, is one of the more proper ways to think of this ability. You're basically just going two-hander.
Yeah,
but
you might as well just imagine once this clicks on, that your character switches. He just reaches his hand over and puts both hands on the weapon instead of just the one.
Exactly.
So I guess one thing that I've been curious on, not to get too off topic, but with this ability, do you think it is too overpowered? How would you feel if in one of the following updates they actually adjusted it and nerfed it a bit?
If they don't nerf it, I would be surprised, because that's just how strong it is to me. That being said, right, you're locked into a particular fighting style, a fighting style that two-handers had since day one. So, it's kind of like a huge payoff. It's a huge payoff for dedication. And that's kind of what combat mastery is, is to a degree, It's specializing in combat. So it's just a very, very narrow build, because you have to dedicate yourself to using a one-handed weapon and never a shield and never pretty much anything else in order to get this benefit. But the benefits that you get are amazingly good. I do think that it might be too strong in some respects, but at the same time, it's like it's 6 points to get. It should be this strong. If it's not this strong, it would never be worth it to go that deep into combat mastery. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at level 10 plus trying to get this along with other skills, so
Yeah, you have to get lucky. You have to get level 4 books, you know.
that's painful enough as it is. So
yeah, it's basically like, are you willing to suffer until you get it? And if that answer is yes, then it's so worth it. And maybe that's why I like it so much, because I like to build up my character, and then I like my payoffs to be big, you know. But I could see them dialing it back a little bit, maybe make weapon damage 25%, you know, maybe make some of this other stuff like 7% or 8%, you know, or even 5% for some of them, you know, maybe on fumble, like the less great ones. But I mean, as it is, I love it.
You almost
it's so
don't
strong.
want it would make sense to nerf it, but you almost don't want them to, just because it's so awesome as it is.
That's exactly what I'm trying to say, actually. Yeah. Yes, that is the most succinct way to put it. I would die a little inside.
Well, all right, guys, we are at the end of our discussion. So, as always, we are at the difficult point where we must make a choice
Combat mastery.
between combat mastery and athletics. Darlee has his opinion. He's saying combat mastery. You want to just get started, and then I'll make my choice.
Combat mastery. I find that I like more abilities in it than I ever have on athletics. That being said, I mean, it was a tough choice, to be absolutely honest, because I did fall in love with athletics recently. But I only fell in love with a certain portion of athletics, and that's usually the left early side. You know, I don't go sudden lunge. I don't go sweeping leg kick, leg sweep. You know, it's almost always going to be mighty kick, elusive, dash, sprint training / peak performance. Those are the ones that are worth it to me on my builds, and those are the only ones I consider to be worth the talent points, the best bang for my buck. Whereas when I go combat mastery, I can go siege into a tactic. I can go siege into a tactic plus the stance if I want to do stances in a different one. I can invest all the way down to right on target for a particular build, or if now that I'm feeling a little bit more saucier about it, I might go into a Warcry build. There's more venues for fun in combat mastery, and different build types. So I that's why I'm voting combat mastery. I just feel like it's a lot more versatile, a lot more fun, or not fun, a lot more versatile, I will say. Power wise, the front loaded athletics fits into a lot of more builds, but I like combat mastery, so I'm going with it.
Yeah, I mean, this is, it's not an easy choice to make on this one. And I do want to point out, now that we're at the conclusion, you don't have to go one or the other. With most builds, you really could just get along with getting Mighty Kick, Elusiveness, getting Seize Initiative, getting one of the stances, and then spending the rest of the points elsewhere. I think that is probably one of the nicest parts about getting these utility trees added in, is that, the right on target's awesome, Warcry's fun. The oh crap button of against the odds and adrenaline rush are nice, but at the end of the day, the majority of people are not going to go full build into either of these. So with heavy heart, I would actually probably still prefer athletics. I almost always go further down into athletics than I do into combat mastery, just for the ability to move around. I will say that the end of the tree is very disappointing compared to Combat Mastery. But at the end of the day, I think elusiveness has saved my butt so many times that I feel like that's almost an essential skill, along with sprint training, peak performance, and even if you're feeling up to it, getting adrenaline rush just for those permadeath runs.
Yeah, I can agree with that. It definitely it does its job well. Athletics, the parts that you describe, and I agree definitely. The end part of athletics is disappointing. I think they need to change that up, but I fear the day they do. I'm a little worried they're going to do what they did to geomancy, where they'll take some of those really great abilities and put it at the end, and then the crap abilities and put it at the front.
Yeah.
So I'm worried, but it is what it is. It may have to happen.
Yeah, they did something similar to daggers too, so it's entirely possible. We'll just got to keep our fingers crossed. I mean, we are in early access, so there's a lot of balancing as they're adding stuff that needs to be done. So if it's done, so be it. We'll just have to change how we do our builds. But yeah, I think we're in agreement for most things. But I would definitely I'm considering too when I do another build. I really like the idea of sudden lunge and the additional ability, the no time to linger. Even though you have to sink 2 points into it, it sounds like a really nice combo to use, which I've considered when I first saw athletics, but I never actually followed through and get it because I always go elusiveness and dash.
Yeah, after using it a little bit more, I think I want to test it more. I want to try and see if I should be using it more.
Yeah, exactly.
For the confusion. Although I wonder if undead are even susceptible to confusion.
That's a good question.
That could play a large part of. I mean, everything can be stunned, but I don't know about confusion. They might just have empty heads. So
yeah, it's
but
true.
You never know. It's like you told me about that bleeding skeleton, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's just more or less a bug in how the animations go. If you guys are not aware, after one of our last discussions, axes versus daggers, if you use execution on a skeleton, it will bleed when its head pops off. It actually bleed more than I really noticed until I really focused on it. And it's just obviously a bug in how the animation's going and not any indication that they should be getting bleed. But the confusion piece is funny because their dialogue makes it sound like their heads are empty anyways. So how they already seem confused. So how much more confused can they get,
Exactly.
But so we're at the end of the podcast. So I just wanted to thank Darley for joining me on this little discussion. Definitely go check out both of our channels. Mine, obviously, Beardodood. I do live streams every Sunday of Stoneshard. We're doing an Arna Mace's shield build, which after this discussion might change into a shield combat mastery build. We'll see. I release videos each and every day around 3 o'clock, the majority of which are Stoneshard. And I also release semi-weekly edited content, informational, sometimes more fun stuff about the lore surrounding Stoneshard. And I think we'll both be following this game until it actually releases.
Definitely. Thank you guys for listening along with us as we debated these two good topics. Thanks again to, I believe it was Positron Mike, who suggested the topic. Don't forget to write in the comments below what you would like us to discuss next. If you have an opinion, we may or may not follow it, but you can at least help try and contribute in that way. Don't forget to check out my vids at 12 and 12. I think after my current run, I might actually start trying to do some art for Stoneshard until Wave 4 comes out. So that might be my regular uploads, but definitely be on the lookout. Leave a comment if you have something to say. Hit like and subscribe to help support our channels. That being said, take care, stay safe, have a wonderful day. This is DarLeeLlama and
Beardodood
signing off.
Out. Peace.
And we will see you next time. Peace.